So, in this episode of the Intentional Mom podcast, I am excited to share with you a conversation that I had with Laurie Palau during our Simplify Your Holiday Season Summit. And we were talking about, she's an expert in clutter, but the cool thing is that she is an expert on clutter as well as the Enneagram. And I don't know about you, but I am fascinated by the Enneagram. And so we had this amazing conversation about how your Enneagram and how a little bit about how understanding that can help you understand yourself when it comes specifically to getting things done, right? We sit and we fight against ourselves and we just aren't doing things. We lack motivation, we lack energy. We find ourselves in this cycle of procrastination sometimes, and knowing your Enneagram and how that plays a role can be so helpful. So I am so excited to share this conversation that I had with Laurie with you. Enjoy. Well, hey there, I am Jennifer Roskamp, a certified life coach and homeschool mom of 9 who is passionate about helping women just like you embrace the here and now while also being focused on creating the life you actually want. In reality, it's not about thinking life will get so much better or so much easier when you fill in the blank. Let's work on creating a life you love now. So let's dive in and get started on redefining Supermom to be someone who is present, intentional, and content rather than perfect in our homes, in our lives, and in our own skin. Let's get started. This is the Intentional Mom Podcast. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Laurie.
Oh my gosh, I hate reading those bios because they sound so obnoxious, but thank you for having me.
Well, there are so many different touch points with which you can help women today who are struggling with so many different things. So I love that. Well, you
Yeah.
are certainly an expert in all things clutter, which is a common issue anytime and really during the clutter. So I would love to know firsthand, has clutter ever been an issue for you? And what did that look like? And what does it look for you now? Is it still a struggle? I would love to hear just a little bit about your journey with kind of how you became passionate with clutter, organization, that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, before I answer the question, let me just clarify how I define clutter, because the answer is going to be yes, I struggle with clutter. And I think most of us struggle with some type of clutter, but we oftentimes just think of clutter in the very tactical sense of the physical clutter. You think of laundry, dishes, piles of paper. And yes, of course, that is one facet, but I take a much more holistic approach to looking at clutter, and it's not just limited to that physical stuff. So I oftentimes, and you may hear me reference emotional clutter or calendar clutter. And then we have other offshoots like digital clutter and financial clutter and all these other things. So yes, do I struggle with clutter? Not a ton of physical clutter anymore based on the season of life I'm in, but calendar clutter is always a struggle for me. I'm always offering, saying, yes, I can do this. I'll be a part of this summit. I'll take on this client. I'll go to this speaking event. Sure, I'll sit on this, I'll be booster mom for this, or I'll sit on this committee for that. So I think when we look at clutter, it's really important to clarify and define what is it that we're even talking about, because I think most of us will in some way have some struggle that we're battling with.
Too much stuff. Like you say, whether it's too much stuff on our calendar, too much stuff bottled up inside of us, emotion wise, too much mental clutter. Thinking
100%.
things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yeah. And just a real, my quick journey, if I'll kind of give you my quick Cliff Notes version is I have my kids, like I said, they're grown-ish. I call them. They are 20 and 23. And when they were babies, my husband traveled a lot, and I was working full time, but from home. So I had flexibility back in the day before people work from home. And I was executive recruiter, and I was trying to juggle being a mom. I was trying to juggle doing my job, and I was trying to juggle a household. And I was trying to wear all those hats predominantly by myself a lot of the time because my husband wasn't around. And so I needed to develop systems and strategies in my home so that things could be organized and I could do all the things, whether that was meal planning and prep or organizing like the diaper zone in my house or whatever it was, so that I could just navigate life. And I didn't realize at the time that this was laying the groundwork for then what would be my next chapter, my next career. And I also realized, and I apologize in advance if we can hear this. I have a dog that's like, "Oh, I'd like to go for a walk right now," and we are not. So I'm sorry if we hear him in the background. Um, but I didn't realize that all of these little things I was doing in my life were really just dropping breadcrumbs for what would be the framework of my business. And as I got into more mom mode of things, I would see my friends struggling. And there was this level of shame and embarrassment and stress and anxiety that was caused from not having these systems and strategies. And because they didn't have the planning or they didn't have the tools in the toolbox to know how to do certain things, they would just be disorganized and have all of this clutter. And they just were like, is this what my life is? And I would come in there and offer these tips and suggestions, and that eventually grew into a business. But my end game was never the organization. It was never the Pinterest perfect pantry. It was never, it was always the so that you could feel comfortable having an impromptu guest, so that you weren't snapping at your kids, so that you didn't feel like you were drowning in all of the things. And so that was always the way I kind of approached clutter and organization. And people will come to me and say, my house is a mess. I'm just organized. I don't know what to do. And like you were saying, looking at clutter as the end result, as the problem. And I started saying, no, clutter is the result of something else that's going on. So if we can peel back the layers, and I always joke about being like, this is where I would put my fake psychologist hat on, but let's looking at what's going on in your life so that this clutter which is the reason why your clutter is resulting. Are you taking on too many things? Do you not have the right system? Maybe you do need a better physical system to organize. Maybe your utensils are in the wrong drawer. Maybe it is that. But maybe you're taking on too many things. Maybe you need to delegate or outsource. Maybe there's a better way that you can streamline you don't have to run to the grocery store 10 times a day, whatever it looks like. And so that was really kind of how the whole principle of Simply Be Organized was born from that.
Yeah, well, and like you're talking about too, is so often we think of our life as compartmentalized, right? Like this is my clutter, my home care, my homekeeping container, and this is my schedule, and this is my finances. And we think of how we think that our life is all these little compartments. But what we don't realize is, like you're talking about, and you're talking about the holistic way of looking at it, which is all these compartments and containers free flow in, one into the other. And so, it's not just this is my struggle, it's maybe this is actually causing the struggle, and this is also experiencing the ramifications of this particular struggle. And so I love how you're mentioning that, because that is so true. But so often we look at it and assume that it's just this one small thing, but it actually is affected and fed into and creates results in so many other areas as well. And so you combine the Enneagram with tackling clutter. Can you start first by telling us a little bit more about the Enneagram for those who may not know?
Absolutely. And I love this because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So the Enneagram is a personality typology that's been around for hundreds of years. It's recently, I would say in around 2017, started getting a lot of buzz. So in certain kind of communities and areas, people will start talking about it. But I still come in contact with a lot of people that are like, the Ennea, what is it? And it's actually just a Greek word for 9 different types. Ennea, and then there's 9 core types. Now, it's like an onion. There's lots of layers, but just to kind of keep things simple. And what differentiates your Enneagram type, or what determines your Enneagram type, is your core motivation. So it's the why you do what you do. So a lot of people are familiar with personality typologies like Myers-Briggs or the four tendencies or strength finders, all these different ones. And they're all great and they all serve a purpose. But a lot of them look at your behavior. And what differentiates the Enneagram is that it looks at the why you do what you do. And so if you go back to kind of what I was saying earlier about the clutter is looking at the why your clutter's there in the first place. When I was first introduced to the Enneagram, I loved it because it started to talk about why certain people, really the lens in which you see the world, why you do what you do. So you could have 9 different people that are all procrastinating, but they're all doing it for a different reason. And the 9 people that are struggling with this, but the reason behind it is all different based on their Enneagram type. So I started going down this whole rabbit hole of looking at what are the characteristics of the different types? What are the strengths and kind of maybe the areas of struggle? And how can we incorporate this teaching into our everyday practical lives without having to like get a whole curriculum and learn a whole new thing, but really, really kind of, for lack of a better word, dumb it down and just make it applicable with stuff that we already know the way that we're already moving through the world. And it's become a really powerful communication tool that provides very simple language for parents to use with their kids, for couples to use with their spouse or their partner, and you to help understand yourself. Maybe why do I feel the need to control everything? Or why do I struggle with execution? Why do I, whatever the thing is, it really provides you this context and language. And so I've kind of mirrored the two, or married the two, I should say, of looking at all the years of teaching that I've done with identifying the different types of clutter, what I call the clutter pitfalls, which are procrastination and indecision and guilt and fear and overwhelm and time, all of those. And how can we lean into where we're naturally strong and where can we kind of build those muscles where we are maybe a little bit weaker or struggling a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I love about what you're saying is, and what I love about this whole idea in general is that I am definitely a firm believer in the idea that in order to fix a problem, you need to understand more about your relationship with that problem, which is what I really feel like you're doing here when you're combining personality and motivation. Now, that was one thing I didn't realize about the Enneagram, is that it really looks at that motivation piece, because that is like you mentioned some of those other personality tests, which I'm familiar with. And you're right in the fact that those are not speaking directly to motivation. So I love that is kind of the basis and how your Enneagram type is determined. So before we go any further, how can someone relatively quickly and easy, I'm hoping there's a way to relatively quickly and easy determine what your Enneagram, is it a number? Is it a score? What is it? What do you even call it?
Yeah, it's some people call it a number, some people call it a type. We'll call it a type. Okay. And I just want to say one thing. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to say what really is important, whether you're learning the Enneagram or you're learning anything else, is about the practical application. How can I apply this and use this in my life? Because
it's not just to put a label on me.
Right. Or as a conversation starter, as like a party game. You know what I mean? Like, hi, I'm Laurie. I'm an Enneagram 8. What's your Enneagram type? Like, that's fun. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as somebody who's a doer and somebody who maybe is saying like, I want to better my life in this particular area, it's how can I use this information and apply it to my life so that I can be healthier, better, live with less clutter, be more fit, eat better, whatever the fill in the blank is for you. Yeah. And so when I talk about the Enneagram, my goal is to inform you, give you that education, that knowledge, but then also say, here's how you can use it. Here's some practical ways that you can actually lean into this so that you can reduce the conflict, increase the communication, all of that. So I just wanted to say that it's really about the practical application, which is where the transformation comes in.
Yeah. And I feel like an important spinoff here, though, too, would also be a caution that you would probably agree with, which is we also don't want to learn what our what do you call it? Our type is. We don't want to
Yes.
learn what our type is so that we can use it as a hindrance, or I don't want to say an excuse, but a
Yes. No, we
reason
say
why
that
we
all the
say,
time. No,
right?
I say that all the time. The
So
Enneagram,
true.
it's not an excuse. It's not something that we should weaponize. It's not to say, well, I'm an Enneagram 4, so I'm just going to be disorganized. Or I'm going to be mean and abrasive because this is no, 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 no. It's
Right.
once you know it, you have a responsibility to do better because your superpower with your Enneagram is also kind of like your kryptonite, right? So the best parts of you are also the worst parts of you.
Yeah.
And so how can I use that to be like the healthy version of myself?
Yes.
And not
Important.
again, you're not putting a period at the end of the sentence. You're using that as a launch pad to say, okay, now that I know this, so it's like again, you go to the doctor because you're having a headache. You find the root cause of the headache. Oh, you really need glasses. Okay, so now you have a responsibility to go and get your glasses and do the things. Or I'm struggling with this so that I need to do A, B, and C. So that's how I approach it. Is I'm going to give you I'm going to give you the knowledge, but then I'm going to give you the tools to apply it, not to just go, well, sorry, that this is just the way I am.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about how is the best way to learn about it? So I'm going to give the not popular response, which is there are quizzes out there, but quizzes are historically 70% inaccurate. And the reason being is that we often answer questions based on our behavior, or we answer questions based on how we think we want to respond versus how we actually respond. And not that there's damage in being mistyped. However, what I've seen people do is take a quiz, get a result that is not accurate, and then but they lean into that result and they start to do all this research and learning about this one type, and it's really not applying to them. So my recommendation, and I do this in my teaching, is really just reading about each of the 9 types. And even in my talking about them, you're going to start to learn and hear that is so not me, or this might be me. And
Yeah.
in the simplest of terms, the Enneagram focuses what I think the secret sauce is about the Enneagram is about the 3 intelligence centers that are within each of us. And that's thinking, feeling, and doing. We all make decisions through our heads, logic, analytics. We also do it through emotions, through our hearts and feelings. And we also do it through intuition, kind of through that gut instinct. And so all of us have all 3 of those centers within us. But for some of us, we're dominant with thinking. Some of us were dominant with feeling, and some of us were dominant with intuition. And so there's 3 that are in each one because there's 9 centers. So normally when I just start talking about it, people will go, oh my God, I'm somebody who wears my heart on the sleeve. I'm a feeling center person. Well, immediately I could say, if you know that about yourself, you've just eliminated 6 numbers or 6 types. And you can originally say, okay, well, let me read up on these 3 and see which one maybe sounds a little bit like me.
Yeah.
And so again, this isn't necessarily a prescriptive recipe, but this to me is really the most organic way for somebody without a preconceived notion of, oh, I want to be a 2 because 2s are called the helper, and who doesn't want to be a helper? Like,
Yeah.
let's take the labels off of it.
Yep.
And let's look at the characteristics, because again, there's so much fluidity. I don't know if this is a word, but I use it all the time. Fluidity. It's a very fluid movement. And what I love about the Enneagram is, again, when we're stressed, we may start to look like this type. And when we're feeling really good and confident, we start to look like this type. And when we're stressed, we look here. So again, our core motivation never change, even though we fluctuate in real life as humans. And we show up differently depending on the situation. And so really starting to understand yourself and knowing like, oh yeah, I'm somebody that likes data. I'm always in my head. Okay, great. Well, now we're going to learn a little bit about more of those head centers. So that's kind of what my
so
spiel
there's a book, right? And isn't it called The Way Back to You or something similar? Am I remembering?
Yes, The Road Back to You. And that is a great book that talks all about it. I also, and I believe that this is like a freebie that we have. I have what I have it's like a cheat sheet. I call it my 9 types cheat sheet. And I literally give,
Cut to the chase.
yeah, each of the 9 types, what's your core motivation, the core fear, are they thinking, feeling, or doing dominant?
Yeah.
And it gives a little like Cliff Notes snapshot. And most people can immediately go, well,
Yep.
that's not me. That's not me. That's not me. This could be me. This could be me. And then you could do a little bit more digging.
Yeah.
If you want to take a quiz, again, there's no harm in it per se, but I just think you have to take it with a grain of salt because
Yeah.
they're not overly accurate.
Yep. And it's interesting because you are not the only person that I have heard say that. And so that's confirmation to me, like, yeah, because you're right, is when we take a quiz, a lot of times we kind of, again, we know, like, we see the different options there and we think, oh, I don't want to admit to this, right? Like that is not me because I don't want it to be me. Whereas sometimes, what if it really kind of is,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I started reading about my type, it was like cringeworthy. I was like, oh no, like, how did you know that? Because that's not, like that's not necessarily a good look, but it's
Yeah.
true, but it's true.
Yeah.
And it's kind of having that honest look in the mirror.
Yeah. So when we think about then kind of doing a little bit of research, figuring out,
Mhm.
where we might identify with, what do we do from there if we want to apply it to kind of a holistic approach with clutter, maybe to some of the big things, like if, like if I were to think of what are some of my biggest types of clutter that I struggle with, right? Is it the more physical clutter that you speak of? Is it the calendar clutter? Is it mental or emotional clutter? So if we kind of think about maybe what some of our biggest needs are, how can we take the type that we might discover that we are and use that as information to help us maybe better some of these areas?
Yeah, I mean that's the secret sauce, right? Like that's the big question. And it's funny because when I started studying the Enneagram, I was asking those questions because I started seeing like all of these connection points going, wait a second, I see these people struggling with emotional clutter and I'm seeing certain patterns of behavior. And I started like looking for how can we apply the Enneagram? And there was no books, there was no resources out there to do that. And this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And that started me down this whole rabbit hole of developing an entire framework to say, okay, here is where your normal strengths and struggles are. Here are some strategies to apply it. And so I have on my website, we have a series of mini courses and regular teachings. And on my podcast, we've unpacked all the different types to be able to really understand. But I think what's really important for people to know is just being aware of, okay, if I know, and again, starting with the thinking, feeling, and doing, and saying, especially during times of stress, which could be the holidays, which can be, we have more obligations on our calendar, we have more deadlines to meet, we have more physical stuff in our house, we have more emotional stress because, again, the holidays are emotional. Everything gets exacerbated, everything is elevated. And so, how am I navigating that my stress level when it comes to feeling overwhelmed with clutter, physical clutter, counter clutter, emotional clutter? And so, I say, let's look at this and say, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I doing? And really have that action plan for each one of those. So the different types, so like just to kind of give for people who are familiar, or for people who aren't, the twos, threes, and fours, right? There's 9 types. So the twos, threes, and fours are all those feeling emotional centered. They are your heart centered people. So they may have a tendency to want to take on more things for people because they feel bad about saying no, or they want to, they're come from a very servant's heart approach to things. And so helping to set those healthy boundaries and saying, it's okay for me to not commit to something or to delegate something, to having those conversations about, okay, let me look at this. If I know emotionally I want to do this, logically, does this make sense? Is this something I should be doing? What are the action steps I can do to help reduce this clutter, to reduce this stress and anxiety?
Yeah.
Because
So like you,
yeah, go ahead.
so like you're saying, when you know that I tend to make, I'm motivated through this emotional center, when, like you're saying, once you know that, that becomes kind of like the lens or the filter then through which you intake things. So if using those examples, like you say, I know that I tend to lead with my emotions, then you use that as knowledge, I imagine, is what you would say. You use that knowledge to say, when opportunities present themselves, instead of that immediate answer, which is probably going to be done with the heart, I need
Mhm.
to also apply my other senses, like logic, like reasoning, and all of that, to make sure, that I'm more balanced. It gives you the opportunity to make decisions, take actions, and things in a more balanced way. Is that really
No,
what we're doing?
absolutely. And again, there's going to be nuances between each of the different types, but in the spirit of our time, to go through all of the 9 types,
Right.
I want to, I want to be mindful of that. So grouping them, but if that's about you, then looking at the specifics of the 2, that's the helper, and the 3, that's the achiever, and the 4, that's the individualist. Look at your individual nuances of where your natural strengths are. And again, all of that's in my cheat sheet. Like, you could just see that and
Right.
learn a little bit more about it. And it also gives you empathy and grace for the other people in your life, because we are relational beings as humans. And so when you're working, whether it's yours, like I said, your spouse, your kids, your parents, if it's at work, and your coworkers, these are the people, and you don't have to type other people you actually aren't supposed to, but just being aware of how people are responding to things. Are they coming at it from a more emotional, or are they coming at it from a more pragmatic, logical approach, or are they coming at it very gut driven? How are they responding to things? Do you see somebody that is constantly just go go go, like myself? I have to be intentional about slowing things down and saying, how does my decisions impact other people's feelings? Because I have a tendency to just barrel through my checklist of things to do. And you think, okay, doing is great, but we don't want to do it at the cost of other people. So I think it's really important. So those are the kind of the heart-centered people. The head-centered folks are 5s, 6s, and 7s. They're the investigators, they're the loyalists, and they're the enthusiasts. And they are constantly using data, facts, logic to drive their decisions. And so again, not that they don't ever use emotion or intuition, but that is just their natural intuition. That is what they lead with. And so action can oftentimes maybe get in the way of things, or of them taking action, because their head is so dominant. And so if you are feeling overwhelmed, or there's other things that are getting bottlenecked, we can often get bottlenecked because we think and we research, and we're trying to gather all the information and gather all the knowledge and do all the things. And that we think we're doing the things, but we're really not. We're like, okay, let me get all this information. And so looking at, okay, we have to pull the trigger. We have to do something. And how is all of this information holding us back from moving forward?
Action.
I've had so many people that are like, okay, I'm researching. And again, this isn't limited. You don't have to be in this type to do this, but I've seen like so many people where they're like, okay, I'm going to research this gift for somebody. And they spend like hours and hours and hours researching something. And it's like, okay, just pull the trigger, do something. Or I want to find just the right recipe, or I want to find just the right thing. And it can oftentimes get in your way of productivity, because you're thinking you're going to make a well-informed decision, but it's coming at the expense of something else when it comes to that organization piece.
Yeah. So then there's one type left. There's one grouping left.
There's one other grouping, which are the 8s, 9s, and 1s. And they are your intuitive center, or a lot of times people call them the gut center. And they're the people that tend to they make their decisions more instinctually based. And so they don't always factor in, they may just go and they may do things, or they may be not using those other centers as prevalently. But again, for very different reasons. So it's really important if you feel like, yes, I think I'm that person, to read up on them. Because, like, for example, I'm an 8, known as a challenger, and we're very driven in one way that is very different than, say, the 9s, who are the peacemakers. So if I always tell people to use this as kind of their launch pad, and then do your research a little bit. And the 1s are known as a perfectionist. And so we all make our initial decisions from an intuitive perspective, but our motivations are going to be different for why we do them. And so where we struggle might be different. But again, the goal is to say, how can I use thinking, feeling, and doing to help me reduce clutter, improve my organization, and really just simplify the parts of my life that feel overwhelmed.
Mm. Yeah. And I love, like, I feel like, well, I would love to know how you would ask this question.
Yeah.
I guess I don't want to assume that I would know. I feel like there's a couple of pitfalls that you could tell us to watch out for. Again, for someone who might be kind of just getting started and get all excited about this and finally feel like this is going to be the key that's going to help unlock if I'm dealing with physical clutter or calendar clutter, whatever. What are a couple of things to make sure we don't do that would maybe not be in our best interest?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think ultimately we want to find the strategies that are going to make sense for us, because I take a look at organization and clutter as a long game. Forget Enneagram, not like this is a long game. We go through seasons of our lives, whether it's like the literal seasons or it's I'm having babies, I'm going to work, I'm changing careers, whatever it is. My kids are now grown, I'm an empty nester. So we go through these seasons where we have to modify our things that are working or things that might not be working like anymore. And so trying to find this one size fits all, or this worked for me once, so it's always going to work for me. I think we have to just come to the realization that it's always a work in progress when it comes to clutter and organization. And that's part of the reason with the Enneagram why it's been really helpful, because people often say, well, do it this way. This is the way. And then if that does not align with what works for you, you wind up white knuckling. And so I think just having that openness, as opposed to saying, maybe there's another way that will allow me to get the result that I'm looking for. And I see this a lot with parents and kids or spouses when it comes to that communication piece, because ultimately when it comes to clutter and organization, we all really want to get to the same result. Nobody wants to have physical clutter around. Nobody wants to feel like they're running around with their heads cut off. Some people want to go the direct route. Some people want to take the back roads. And so I think it's important to say, what are the characteristics of my type? What is this? What are the natural things that my type is like? How can I be the better version of myself? How can I use my gifts to help other people? How can I use the gifts that I have, lean into them, know where I might be a little bit weaker when it comes to that, and maybe seek help from those other people that might be stronger in some other areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Such great advice. So I love to ask everybody, for one, like we've talked about so much good information here. And if we want to help someone take what we've talked about today and set it into motion, like quick and easy, what is a quick and easy place for someone to start who says, oh my gosh, like I said, this is my answer. Where should they start?
Okay, well, all the clutter and Enneagram framework, you can come right to my website. Go to simplybeorganized.com/Enneagram and clutter, or just go to Simply Be Organized. You'll see Enneagram and clutter there, because it's the only place you're going to find anything specifically related to clutter and the Enneagram. There's nothing else that's been developed to this point on that. Now, the Enneagram in general, there's tons of resources out there that is going to inform you. You mentioned one, The Road Back to You is great. There's tons of other great podcasts and resources. And if you want to, go on, The Road Back to You is a great introduction book that I have read and use and bought for other people. And I think it's a great introduction to learning about the Enneagram and really figuring it out. But again, if you want to say, how can I apply this Enneagram and in my life when it comes to clutter and organization in the practical way, just download my cheat sheet. There's tons of free resources there. And then if you're interested in learning more, there's digital courses, there's one-on-one coaching, I do workshops, all the things.
Yeah.